Hello there everyone, Matt here from thevirtualinstructor.com, and in this video I'd like to share with you a time-lapse taken from one of our recent live lesson series where we combined alcohol-based markers and colored pencils to create a wonderful drawing of a frog. Now if you're interested in this complete live lesson series, which is over 10 hours long, it's available to members at thevirtualinstructor.com. To learn more about our program, just visit thevirtualinstructor.com/members, or you can click on the link in the corner of this video or of course in the description below this video. You can also check out 3 of our course modules for free if you'd like. Again, you can just click on the link in the corner of this video or in the description below this video if you want to check out 3 of our course modules, which includes videos and ebooks. So thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy the following time lapse. So we'll start here with a quick and loose sketch on marker paper using an H graphite pencil. You can see I'm holding the pencil low on the shaft. That will create lighter marks on the surface. We don't want to put a heavy amount of graphite on the marker paper surface. Now marker paper is a smoother surface, but it does a really great job of accepting marker applications clearly, but it has enough tooth that we can apply colored pencil applications over the top. So here at the early stages, we're just concerned with the contours, the outer outlines of the frog. And you can see I'm making a few adjustments here as I go and not worrying too much about erasing. Then once we've got the outer contours in place, then we can start developing some of the details. We'll lay out where the eyes are located, and then of course we'll do a little bit of erasing before we go into some of the details. We can check and make sure our proportions are correct. And I'm using a kneaded eraser to do the erasing here. Then once we've refined the outer contour, we can go in and start developing some of the details like the spots and little small imperfections on the body of the frog. We're not going to get too carried away here since a lot of our detailed work is going to be accomplished using the markers and colored pencils. Now that our graphite sketch is in place, we can start applying the marker applications, and the marker applications are going to act as somewhat of an underpainting. They're going to establish some of the colors and some of the values, but of course we're going to develop the details with the colored pencil applications. Now I'm using alcohol-based markers here, and these are Premier markers made by Prismacolor. We're going to use the chisel tip here at the beginning because we want to cover large areas, but of course for the smaller areas we can switch over to the smaller, finer tip. Now with additional applications, you'll notice that the color gets a little bit more intense and the value gets a little bit darker, and this is one of the characteristics of alcohol-based markers. So we can slowly start to develop some of the values, and value of course is the darkness or lightness of a color. And we can also go in and start developing some of the texture here by using some of the darker greens over the top of the lighter greens. So you can see here I've now switched over to a brighter green, which is slightly darker as well. And then we're going to go ahead and start developing some of the texture, leaving some spaces for some of the lighter greens to show through. Now we're going to use a series of grays to start adjusting the values. And you can see with this lighter gray that we're applying over the top, it's starting to create some indications of some shadows. And of course, as I mentioned before, the more we go over an area, the darker the color gets. We'll get quite a bit darker with a slightly darker gray here and start establishing some of the spots. So we're slowly building up the contrast in this image. And of course, it's important to point out here that even though this is a time lapse, this process was a time-consuming process. This is not something that you can sit down and do really, really quickly and expect to get representational results. It does require patience and a little bit of a time commitment. But of course, everything that we do in life that is worthwhile, that's the case. So here, even a darker gray to establish those spots. And now we're starting to build up some of the contrast. We're getting a better idea of the form of the frog here, the direction of the light source, and the form of the frog, of course. Now with our marker underpainting in place, we can start applying the colored pencils, and you'll see here that the color is going to get much more bold, and of course we're going to be developing the details. So we're going to apply a series of colored pencils here. We're not going to use black at all. So you can notice in the inside part of the eye, we've got some really dark values here, but to create these dark values, we're actually layering dark umber and indigo blue to create a more natural looking black. And as we're making these applications, you can still see some of the tooth of the paper. So periodically we'll go back in with a colorless blender and burnish some of these applications, creating a smoother appearance, which is much more natural. So you can see here that the marker underpainting is doing a lot of the work for us. We can still see some of the colors underneath. Of course, we could tackle the subject using colored pencils alone, and the time commitment would still be pretty heavy, but we do save a little bit of time because we do have the marker underpainting in place. And of course, because we have the marker underpainting in place, we can concentrate on the colored pencil applications without really having to think about the drawing process. We can concentrate more on the value relationships and the colors that we apply. So once we've got a buttery surface in place by applying the wax-based colored pencils, we can go back in and start adding some of those small imperfections that happen on the face of the frog. We'll use a little bit of a color called 90% warm gray to darken up some of the values as we go. But again, no black is used here at all. We'll also start addressing some of the highlights, especially in the areas where you have those wonderful spots. And again, we're using a combination of indigo blue and dark umber to do so. But before we start darkening up these areas, we add a bit of white to make sure that we preserve those highlights. Now we'll continue working down underneath the mouth of the frog and on the chest of the frog. And this frog has some spots on its chest. So we start with an application of dark umber, a bit of the 90% warm gray, and then we can go over the top of those applications with the color cream and, of course, a bit of the colorless blender to make up a smoother appearance, which is much more natural. We'll simply continue working our way down to the leg, the right leg of the frog here. And again, you can see in this highlighted section, this section where we have a strong spot, we're going to go ahead and preserve the areas of highlight first. And you can see a little bit of the blue showing through, and that's produced by the indigo blue, and that makes a more natural looking highlight. So again, our dominant light source is originating from the upper right-hand corner, and this is going to produce areas of coarse shadow on the opposite side. So you can see this very clearly here on this leg where we have an area of coarse shadow on the left side of the frog's leg. But we also do have a small reflected highlight, and that occurs because light comes down and bounces off of the surface that the frog is sitting on and then back on the other side of the leg. So it's slightly lighter there. We'll go ahead and address the arm and the leg on the other side of the body of the frog. And you can see as we go, we're continuing to push the contrast, or increasing the contrast between light and dark values. And at the same time, we're also broadening the range of value. Now we'll start addressing some of the texture on the back of the frog, and the key to creating the illusion of texture in a drawing or painting really boils down to your use of value. Again, value is the darkness or lightness of a color. Directional stroking, of course, is important as well, but you can see the texture develop on the back of the frog here because we have light values and dark values, and the way these light and dark values interact often create the illusion of texture. Here again, we'll go over these applications once we have some of the colors in place with a colorless blender to smooth out the surface, creating a more realistic texture. And you'll notice as we started to add some of those darker greens on the back, we started to lose the spots. So now we're going back in with a combination of indigo blue and dark umber, and of course a bit of white to preserve those highlights to increase the contrast here, and slowly you'll see those spots start to reappear. Now we'll simply continue working our way down the back of the frog, again continuing to develop that texture. Now again, this is a patient process, it's a slow process, but the good news is we don't have to follow the photo reference exactly. We can pick up clues on how this texture is perceived by the viewer and create this illusion on our drawing surface by, again, arranging the values in the correct locations. So anywhere where we have bumps that stick out from the surface, of course, those are going to catch a bit of light, so those are going to be highlighted. So you can see we're going in here with a white colored pencil to preserve those highlights. And then we can go back in with a series of greens, and basically we're going to work from lighter greens to darker greens to slowly build up some of those darker values in between each one of those bumps. And the stronger the contrast you create here, the stronger these bumps are going to appear. So it's completely up to you how bumpy you make your frog if you decide to undertake this drawing. And here again, we're not using black, so a bit of indigo blue is used here to create kind of a cooler shadow, and we can balance that with the dark umber to warm it up just a bit. And then of course there are a few spots in this section as well. Now that we've got the main body in place, we'll turn our attention to the hind leg. And here again, we're just going to do the same thing. We're basically going to build up the illusion of texture based on the relationships of values, and all the time we're keeping in mind where our light source is originating from. So this is going to produce highlights on the right side of the leg and areas of core shadow on the left side of the leg. So here again, we're slowly getting darker, applying a variety of darker greens and then a bit of dark umber and then a touch of indigo blue to darken up the shadow here. And of course, as you work, since we're working with colored pencils, it's important to preserve those areas of highlight and make sure that you have those covered with lighter values before you start to really push the darker values, because of course it's harder to apply lighter colored pencils over the top of darker applications. And here again, we can really see the power of contrast here with our spots where they kind of disappear when we add those darker greens, but then we can bring them back out again with a combination of indigo blue and dark umber. Colored pencils really have the ability to create an image that looks like a painting, and when you combine them with marker applications first, it really gives you a high level of control over your drawing, and it really helps to create a realistic appearance. All right, now we'll turn our attention to the belly of the frog here, and in this case we're going to apply an application of cream first, and then over the top a bit of the 90% warm gray, and we can warm up these applications with a bit of the dark umber as well. We'll add a few hints of green in this section as well, just to make sure that it kind of ties in with the green body of the frog, and there's a smooth transition from the upper part of the body to the lower part of the body. And then of course I cannot express the power of the colorless blender, which really helps to smooth things out. We'll add a bit of cast shadow into the frog so he doesn't look like he's floating there in space, and we'll do this with a variety of cooler grays with the marker first and then cooler grays with the colored pencil underneath. And now our drawing is complete using markers and colored pencils.